Hello, and welcome to today's OneOp webinar. I'm Kaylin Goebel-Mathis, and I am a Program Development Specialist for OneOp. I will be moderating today's session, Strengthening Support, Child Advocacy Centers, and Military Partnerships. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a brief tour of our webinar platform so you can find your way around. Hopefully, you are able to view the slides we're sharing currently. If you can't see them or are having any other difficulties, please let us know by emailing us at contact@oneop.org for tech support. We hope you join us in engaging in the chat pod today, as some already have. And as our audience and our service providers working with our military families, we welcome you to discuss your practice and experiences as we go through this presentation. So we definitely want to hear from you. And to embed the chat pod so you don't miss any links or conversations, simply place your cursor over the shared slides. You should then see a toolbar pop up across the bottom of your screen. From there, just click the chat bubble icon. When typing your questions and submitting those, please ensure that everyone is selected from the drop-down response menu, just so that everyone joining today can see your comments and contributions in the chat pod. Please note that the slides and resources we will be discussing herein are available on the webinar event page. We will cover continuing education, credit information, and how-tos at the end of the webinar, so please stay tuned until the very end if you're obtaining CE credits or wish to receive a certificate of attendance, especially if this is your first time joining a OneOp session. We'll cover that information at the end. Closed captioning is also available for this webinar. You can turn on subtitles via the Zoom toolbar as well at the bottom of your screen. Thank you so much for joining us as we continue our partnership with the Department of Defense and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to expand the readiness, knowledge, and networks of professionals like yourselves supporting our military service members and their families. The views expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the official policy of the Defense Department, USDA, U.S. government, or OneUp. The mention of any entity or product in this session is for informational purposes only. So for today's session, we are happy to be joined by presenters Heather Provencher and Amber Garrison Ahmed. Heather is a senior manager of federal partnerships at the National Children's Alliance. She oversees NCA's efforts to expand access to children's advocacy centers through federal partnerships. Prior to joining NCA, she worked in various roles in public child welfare and in investigative advocacy and prevention education roles at child advocacy centers in Maryland and California. So expansive roles there. And Amber is the coordinator for federal partnership at the National Children's Alliance. In this role, Amber leads efforts to support CACs in working with military partners and providing those coordinated services to military families across the country. Prior to joining NCA, she worked at a space-based Delta II as a family advocacy officer for the United States Space Force Family Advocacy Program. Before I officially hand things over, just a few quick reminders. A recording of this presentation will be available on the webinar event page for on-demand viewing, as well as resource sharing. That will typically be up within 24 to 48 hours after today's conclusion of the webinar. So be sure to check back on the webinar event page as that one-stop shop, which will also include the recording. You can download also on the event page a PDF handout of today's presentation and find a linked list of webinar resources that will be mentioned throughout the presentation. Our presenters will be answering questions at the end of today's session if time allows, so please use the chat pod to submit those, making sure that everyone, again, is selected from that drop-down menu. And again, one last time, I will cover those continuing education credit information at the end of today's session as we wrap up and conclude the webinar. And with that, I am very happy to hand things over to Heather and Amber to begin our session today.
Thank you so much, Kaylin. I'm going to go ahead and work to advance our slides. Here we go. Now it's popping up. Okay, fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Kaylin. We are so excited and just really delighted to join you on your webinar today, and really excited and appreciate the opportunity to connect with the OneOp community. Before we begin, I'd like to just note that the work of National Children's Alliance to establish and strengthen Children's Advocacy Center and military partnerships is supported by a grant from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, Office of Justice Programs, U.S. Department of Justice. So please note this disclaimer language on the slide, and that everything Amber and I share today does not necessarily reflect upon or represent the Department of Justice.
All right, let's go over our learning objectives for today. So, the first one is understanding the CAC model and the CAC role in supporting military families. We'll explain the importance of partnerships and community engagement and identify strategies to strengthen coordination of care through CAC military partnerships. All right, before we begin, we want to do a quick check-in so we get an idea of who is with us on the webinar today and your knowledge base about child advocacy centers. So we are going to have a quick little poll question. And the question is, I am familiar with child advocacy centers, and you've got 5 choices here. So strongly disagree, disagree, either agree or disagree, agree or strongly agree. So let's get an idea of what we've got. This will give us a good idea of who we're talking to today. Okay. All right. And then our next question, little short answer response. Do you currently work with a CAC? And or have you engaged with a CAC in your community? So add that to the chat pod. A few yeses, a few nos.
Great. Okay, so it looks like there's quite a mix of both familiarity with children's advocacy centers, and even for those that are familiar with the model, maybe some variation on how closely you've worked with your children's advocacy center. So that's fantastic to see. And just thank you all so much for joining us today. It's really great to be able to have this conversation, and feel free to put questions throughout our time together in the chat, and we do hope to have some interaction through that chat pod, and certainly we'll have time at the end for questions. So because there is that mix of familiarity in the group, I'm just going to start with an overview of children's advocacy centers and National Children's Alliance to provide some foundational information before we dive into talking about our partnerships with military programs and strengthening services to military families. So the first thing to know is that you're going to hear Amber and I say CACs a lot in this hour, and that is the acronym that we use for Children's Advocacy Centers. So for military program folks in the room, we know CACs, have a different meaning in DoD, but for us, when we say CAC, we're really talking about Children's Advocacy Centers. And CACs have are child-friendly programs where law enforcement, child protection, mental health, medical, victim advocacy, and other professions, including now military programs, come together to provide a multidisciplinary team response to child abuse. And that includes investigating abuse, working to hold offenders accountable, and ensuring that kids are safe and they have what they need to heal from abuse. And CACs can have different names depending on where you are in the country. So you may hear them children or child advocacy centers, but there's other names too, like children's justice centers. So, while they may be referred to differently, they're all going to have that same model. And similarly, they all look a little different depending on the community. So some are hospital-based or housed within a government agency like a Department of Social Services or a prosecutor's office. And many of them are standalone nonprofits that might be housed in their own separate building or as part of another organization's building. So no matter what they look like or what they're called, they're really following this model, which has a lot of benefits, mainly making sure that we are reducing trauma of the response to child victims and witnesses, coordinating services for children and their families, helping to make investigations more efficient, and supporting prosecution efforts. So the CAC model was developed in the 1980s in response to a very child abuse response system. Before the CAC model, a child might disclose abuse, let's just say, for example, at school, and they might be interviewed by someone at the school, like a counselor, who would then often call law enforcement, and maybe a patrol officer would present to the school, interview that child again. The child might be taken to the hospital where they'd be interviewed again. Child Protective Services would become involved. They would interview, a detective would be assigned, they would interview prosecutors, and on and on. So kids were being interviewed many, many times, and the professionals involved in the case were not sharing information. And the idea of the Children's Advocacy Center model was that we shouldn't make the child and the family go from agency to agency, talking to all of these different professionals who are not talking to each other. Instead, they decided we really need to put the child and the family in the center of that response and bring all of the professionals that need to be involved around the table to support the family and take the burden off them so that they can focus on safety and healing. So CACs really work to make sure that all of those professionals work together as a team, making sure that all of the disciplines get the information that they need for their various responsibilities and are able to contribute their expertise so that that child and family get the best services they possibly can. This model was created to address sexual abuse in the beginning, but as the movement has grown and we've seen the success of the model, many children's advocacy centers are providing services in cases beyond sexual abuse now. So you will know that many CACs provide services in cases of physical abuse for kids who are witnesses to violence, whether that be in the community or mass violence incidents or domestic abuse or intimate partner violence. And they provide services in cases involving youth with problematic sexual behavior. So the Children's Advocacy Center model, with that example that we talked about with the disclosure at school, what it would look like with a CAC is that the child is brought to the Children's Advocacy Center at the very beginning of the process. And typically those cases are referred from either law enforcement or Child Protective Services. We'll talk more about military-connected cases later in the hour, but for military-connected cases, that could be a military criminal investigative organization or other law enforcement agency. And there is a role for family advocacy program as well, depending on the case when it comes to referrals. But typically, for the most part, it's a law enforcement referral or a CPS referral. And that child is brought to the center, and that is where that multidisciplinary team process kicks off. So beginning with the forensic interview. So instead of those multiple interviews, the Children's Advocacy Center model brings together the professionals and one person interviews the child. This is a trained forensic interviewer who has training in a forensic interviewing model that is non-leading and going to, be standing up in court if the case goes to court. And they also have expertise in child development. So making sure that that interview is taking place in a safe space that's conducive to making a child feel comfortable and safe, and that it's really putting their needs in the center of the process while gathering all of the information that the team needs to do their jobs. So often the team will be witnessing or viewing the forensic interview from an observation room. Most CACs will use video camera equipment so that team can view that interview in real time and often take a break towards the end of the interview, and the interviewer can check in to make sure that everybody has the information that they need. And from there, there may be a medical exam or evidence collection, and the CAC really works to coordinate the multidisciplinary team process throughout the case life. So that can look like coordinating case review to make sure that no pieces of what the family needs are dropped, making sure that kids are getting assessed for mental health care needs, any medical needs, and that that family has what they need to make sure that those services are available. And then each agency is going to follow their own process. So, for prosecutors, they'll determine about prosecution. For CPS, they will look at safety, and address their own case needs. But that is how it works with the Children's Advocacy Center process. So really making sure that that care is coordinated is the CAC's role. National Children's Alliance, or NCA, is the national association and accrediting body for children's advocacy centers. So we are now a network of nearly 1,000 CACs across the country in all 50 states and 50 state chapters. The role that we play is to provide support, advocacy, and leadership for the CAC movement, and we provide quality assurance through our accreditation process to make sure that kids that are served by CACs receive consistent, evidence-based services that are going to help them heal. There's a few different types of membership that you might see as you're exploring children's advocacy centers. The first is accredited members. So these are CACs that have met our standards for accreditation. Associate developing standards, those are, associate and developing centers. Those are centers that are working towards accreditation. Affiliate members are multidisciplinary teams that are working to improve services through a collaborative approach. And then satellite members are child-friendly facilities that offer on-site forensic interviews and victim advocacy under the sponsorship of an accredited center. So our CAC Military Partnership Initiative began in 2018 through a grant funded by the Department of Justice Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And this was really something that has helped us so much to develop this effort that we've been able to do with our partners at DoD. And it provided support to really pay attention to what are the needs of military families and how can CACs play a role in the network of care that's available to them. So the first thing that we established was a CAC Services for Military Installations sub-grant program. So NCA receives this grant from OJJDP, and then much of that funding goes back out into the field through a grant program to children's advocacy centers so that they can establish local projects and efforts to strengthen partnerships. We'll talk more about some of those partnerships at the end, but these are grants that can be used for training or developing protocols for working together. And for some CACs that are close to larger installations where there's a higher volume of military family that are served, even having a military-specific advocate or someone to really own those relationships and partnerships with the military installations near them to make sure that things are well coordinated and there's that continuity and that military families' unique needs are addressed. Another piece of what we do is training and education and support. So much of that work, and some of you who are watching this may even be involved with this group because we have over 150 people who participate in our CAC Military Partnership Collaborative Work Group. This is a group that meets the second Wednesday of every month, and they are the ones that really inform what our training and education efforts are. So this is the group that helps us to understand what are the learning needs and then really works hard to address those. So they create webinar series, fact sheets, victim advocacy toolkit. Amber is going to talk more about these resources at the end, but it's been really fantastic to be able to work with CACs, family advocacy program, other programs within DoD, OneOp being one of them, and really get the expertise of all of these fabulous folks in the field working to support military families and putting our heads together on how we can best work together to do that. So that's kind of the second tenet of this initiative. And the third is that we realized we needed to formalize or provide a pathway for formalizing partnerships between children's advocacy centers and the military partners that are involved in cases of child abuse. So this is a short explainer video that was developed by that collaborative work group I mentioned. It's about 1.5 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and play that, and it's going to provide some background information.
Military families are part of all of our communities. Some live on military installations, but most live and attend school right in neighborhoods alongside civilian families. When kids get services from a Children's Advocacy Center or CAC, the CAC may not know about their military connection, often preventing families from getting the individualized care they deserve. Sometimes these military connections are hiding in plain sight, and because there are military-specific law enforcement and legal processes, families may have contact with separate systems that aren't working with the CAC, resulting in repetitive and uncoordinated services. CACs are well equipped to address these challenges. We just need to recognize when we're working with military families and include military partners on the team. To make sure that kids in military families have access to a coordinated response that places them in the center, it's critical to screen for military affiliation when families come to the CAC and build partnerships with military programs to ensure that kids get the best possible care. National Children's Alliance can help you forge connections with military partners in your community. For more information and to get started, visit learn.nationalchildren'salliance.org/military.
All right, so that sort of explains, it's a video that we use to help CACs understand that military families really do have unique needs, and there is a special consideration that needs to be paid when it comes to making sure that the right folks are at the table and part of the multidisciplinary team in this case. And one of the first learning needs that we identified in that collaborative work group I mentioned is that a lot of CACs really needed some help in understanding who those people were, who are the military programs and personnel who should be at the table when we're working with military families. So we developed a group that really identified who those partners should be. Amber's going to share some fact sheets later on in the hour where we outline that for children's advocacy centers to help with that orientation. But as many of you all know, there's medical, there's command, there's law enforcement, family advocacy program, military legal system. There are so many opportunities to engage with Department of Defense partners when it comes to including those folks in the multidisciplinary team. So we'll talk more about that. I'm going to turn it over to Amber to talk about how CACs fit into the military family readiness system, talk more about this formal partnership and our memorandums of understanding that really formalize those partnerships. So Amber, over to you.
Thanks, Heather. All right, so strengthening the military family readiness system. The MFRS is a network of formal and informal programs and services operated by the Defense Department and other federal, state, and community-based agencies and organizations. So that's DoD 1342.22. The MFRS promotes military family well-being by offering programs and services that enhance family readiness, resilience, and quality of life. Collaboration and integration across system promotes positive outcomes for service members and their families across the domains of military family readiness, including career, social, financial, health, and community engagement. And the collaboration with NCA and the CACs strengthen family readiness by providing support services for military families in a time of crisis. So let's talk about what we're doing to get that going. So we'll start with the Memorandum of Understanding. So a Memorandum of Understanding is a formal agreement between two or more parties outlining the terms and conditions of their relationship and mutual responsibilities. So like Heather talked about, the National Children's Alliance did start, it was back in 2018, exploring these MOUs with the Department of Defense. And we ended up with establishing 7 MOUs with military programs to support the CAC military partnership. So the first 3 are with your military criminal investigation organizations, or your MCIOs. So the first one that was signed was with the U.S. Army's Criminal Investigation Division, so CID, which does the investigations for the Army. Then Naval Criminal Investigation Services in CIS, which does the investigations for Navy and Marine Corps. And then Department of Air Force, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, or OSI, which does the investigations for Air Force and Space Force. Then the next 4 MOUs are with the Family Advocacy Program. So we have one with Army's Family Advocacy. Then Marine Corps has their own family advocacy separate from Navy. So we have one with Marine Corps, one with Navy Family Advocacy, and Department of Air Force Family Advocacy. So Air Force and Space Force share the same program. And then let's talk about what is the purpose of NCA's military MOUs. So there we go. So that is to formalize the partnership and encourage CACs and military service coordination for military families so we don't have that fractured response. Provide guidance for installation FAP and MCIOs and accredited CACs to partner and use collective programs and services to meet the needs of military families. It authorizes that information sharing in accordance with federal, state, and local laws. So there's no more worries about family advocacy being concerned about HIPAA issues. This MOU allows for that information sharing back and forth to help coordinate those services. It reduces that administrative burden on CACs and military partners by offering a national MOU, which replaces the need to negotiate an approval of individual MOUs, which is really was quite a struggle for individual CACs to do that with all of the military bases across the country. And it expands access to CAC services for military families. So let's go back one more. I think we missed. There we go. MOU development history. Like we were talking about in 2018, national MOUs were identified as a need. Just 7% of CACs with military installations in their service area reported having an MOU due to the barriers experienced by local partners. It was very difficult to get those signed and at the local installation level. In 2019, NCA began developing MOU plans, including a collaboration with the Department of Defense partners for MOU structure. And then between 2018 and 2021, reports from Defense Health Board and the Government Accountability Office affirmed the need for MOUs between NCA and the Department of Defense programs. And in 2021, the National Defense Authorization Act required the development of the MOUs for each service branch. So the MOUs were developed between 2019 and 2024. Formally, all of them got signed in the spring, summer 2024. So it has been an official year that they have been in place. All right, let's talk a little more about the MOU implementation. So what happens after an accredited CAC signs on? Okay, so what happens? MOU opens the door to partnership, serves as an approval to work together. Next steps for CAC and installation partners is to determine how to work together. So cross-training and program orientation. So learning each other's processes and how your systems work. Reviewing CAC services and protocols. Engaging in military partners in the CAC's multidisciplinary team. And the reverse for the military. You can invite the CACs to be a part of your MDTs as well, especially when you're talking about cases of problematic sexual behavior. They can be, serve as a expert in the field for you on those MDTs. Review the MDT protocols with each other and work towards military participation and CAC participation in those MDTs. And openness to hearing and sharing needs and how to work together better if you come up with any struggles. Review the Getting Started guide and address any remaining steps. And we're going to go over the Getting Started guide a little later in the presentation, kind of a little more thorough explanation. And make plans for point of contact turnover. This is huge because we know just in the military world, there could be a lot of turnover with PCSs, but at CACs, there can also be turnover. All right. And there we go. So go back there. There we go. The MOU status update. So currently, this is a map of our CAC engagement and military partners. So all the little houses on the map are military installations, and they're different colors based on the branch. So you can click on that map and look at that. All the blue dots on the map are all of the accredited CACs that have already signed on to the military MOUs. And these numbers have even gone up a little since we put these slides together. Right now, we're at just over 670 participating CACs that have signed on to the MOU. And we've added a few new accredited CACs as well. And we're up to about almost 800 accredited CACs across the country that you guys could be working with. It's a lot of places to can provide services for your military families. All right, Heather, I think I'll hand it back over to you now.
Thanks, Amber. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some recommendations for enhancing collaboration, and then we'll review some resources and then open it up for questions. So these are some of the recommendations that we provide for children's advocacy centers. And even though not everyone and most people, in fact, in the audience are not from children's advocacy centers, we wanted to share these with you so that you have a sense of the messaging that our CACs are getting. And also for some of these, the flip side of them could be relevant and helpful for you as you explore either reaching out for the first time or strengthening your partnership with the CACs in your community. So the first thing that we are working with CACs on is making sure that they're screening for military affiliation at case intake and tracking the number of military dependent children that are served. So most CACs, when we started this MOU, were not screening or asking about military affiliation. And we know that it's not always obvious when there's that military connection, and we do need to ask so that we can make sure we're properly identifying that military connection and involving the right folks and making sure that that family has access to all of the supports and resources available to them as a result of their military connection. So that's one thing, and certainly something we would love for you to talk with your CAC about and make sure they're doing that and help them understand why that's important. The other thing is we are working to orient them on the military partner programs and what they do and how they can support and benefit the families that they work with. And then encouraging them to take that information and share it with their full multidisciplinary team, especially around family advocacy program. That role is new to a lot of CACs that didn't historically work with the military. So really helping them understand why it's important that FAP is involved with these cases and all of the support and resources and expertise that they bring to the table. One thing that comes up a lot in this work is information sharing, and there's a lot of questions that come out about that. But one of the things that we encourage CACs to do is to look at the status of their state's military-specific child abuse reporting laws. And we know that the DoD, the Defense State Liaison Office, has had this as an issue of priority in their advocacy efforts for a long time, and that majority of states now, in fact, nearly most of them, I think, have laws in place that require that civilian child protective services reporting to family advocacy program, because we know that there's the federal law with Talia's law that requires military to report to CPS, but there's not that reciprocal federal law. So that needs to be done state by state. So we encourage CACs to check the laws in their state and make sure that their CPS partners are aware of those requirements and that the maximum amount of information sharing that's possible is being done so that things are not falling through the cracks and families are getting the full care that they need. And then proactively developing partnerships with military programs in their area. So Amber mentioned that guide to getting started. We're going to talk more about that in a second. But the same goes for military partners. We highly encourage you to reach out before you ever have a need for CAC services. Just pick up the phone, introduce yourself, ask to come for a tour. And we encourage CACs to do the same because we find that that is the best way to kind of kick off these relationships and to help everyone understand kind of what's available and how you can work together to support families in your community. So we wanted to just highlight a few successful collaborations, and I feel like I could talk about this for 3 hours because there's so much good work being done in the field, but I'll highlight a couple just to give you a sense of kind of what this looks like across the country. The first I want to highlight is that the Children's Advocacy Center in Central Texas is about 20 minutes outside of Fort Hood. And so they have had a partnership for many years and have served military families for many years, but really formalized their partnership once they received one of our subaward grants. And through that direct focus, they hired a military-specific family advocate who actually is an Army veteran and really has a passion for making sure that military-connected kids get the care that they need. He really drove this effort as part of this work. And they've built a really strong relationship with Fort Hood. And as part of that, and with the establishment of the Office of Special Trial Counsel, in partnership with Fort Hood, they determined that it would be a value add to have a satellite CAC on the base, on the installation. And just last month in June, they actually had a ribbon cutting ceremony. They opened an entire satellite children's advocacy center on Fort Hood, first CAC on a military installation ever. And they're going to provide services to those families right on base. So especially as we think about mental health treatment and, the time it takes to travel, when you're having to drive to the CAC, they're really excited to watch and see how this model works and really hoping to use it as a pilot to see, could this be something that would be helpful in other communities where there is that large population and there could be a way to facilitate smoother services and just more easily accessible services if there was a representation on base. So we're super excited about that. It was a lot of work on both sides and a lot of commitment on both sides, on the military side and the CAC side. So very excited to see that partnership with the Army Office of Special Trial Counsel at Fort Hood. The other example I thought of as I was thinking about who to kind of give a shout out to is, and I saw there's some folks from Norfolk, Virginia, but the Children's Hospital of the King's Daughter Child Abuse Program in Norfolk, Virginia has had long-standing partnerships with their installations. I mean, I think for decades. And that's an area that has so many military families and so many individual installations. I think they have partnerships with over 15 military installations. So much so that they actually have military specific multidisciplinary teams based on service. So that's an example of what it can look like when you have a very high number of military families in your community, that they really have these well-honed partnerships, separate processes, really making sure that those cases are well coordinated with the military. And that's what it can look like. In other communities, there may just be a handful of families served every year. It's not a large percentage of their families. So in those cases, there is that ongoing relationship building, making sure that the military partners are included in the multidisciplinary team and all the trainings that they do, working together on prevention programming and community events. And what we hear time and time again is that this is truly about relationship building, and equally so, ensuring that there's structure in place so that when individuals transition, those key partnerships can continue even when individuals change. Relationships are key, but we don't want things to be relationship dependent. We want to build in formal systems that can make sure that folks work together, even when those that are passionate about the partnership and really kicked it off move on to other things. Okay, so short answer response that we're looking for here in the chat pod. Give us some thoughts on how do you enhance collaboration with other professionals in your role? So that can be with children's advocacy centers or others. What is your kind of one tip for things that you do to enhance collaboration and build those partnerships to serve the families you work with? Go ahead and put those in the pod, and we will keep an eye on that. And just with eye on time, I'm just going to call out a couple here. Sharing resource information, absolutely, Victoria, that's huge. So, we all have these resources we develop, and then sometimes they can sit within our own system. So really making sure we're sharing those across networks is huge. Meeting with each other in person or virtually, absolutely. And I'll say another thing that I've heard from CACs is regular meetings. So whether that's monthly or quarterly or twice a year, having things on the calendar so that there's that momentum. I'm seeing MDT meetings every week. Yes, all of these things go a long way in establishing partnerships, keeping them going. I'm seeing communication, networking. Oh, these are so good. I want to keep reading them, but we have to move on for the time's sake. So keep them coming and feel free to explore those in the chat. And we're going to move on to highlighting some resources.
All right. So our Getting Started guide, which we talked about earlier, and I know a link to that was put in the chat. So I won't go over it in detail because you do have access to it. So this is the Getting Started guide that we provided to child advocacy centers to help them with steps to build those partnerships with the military. Let's go to the next slide. And these are the 7 steps that are in that guide that get them started. And then we recently developed a Getting Started guide for military partners as well, that's also available on our website. And when you have our website link in some of these slides, you'll be able to get on there and look at that and download that for yourself as well. And I'm just going to highlight a couple things that are really important. And one of that is to identify and maintain those points of contact at the CAC because of turnover. You want to make sure to establish that and let them know in the military when you guys are going to have turnover, let them know who the new point of contact is. One of the really important things that you guys can do is you can go out and visit your CAC, get a tour of your CAC. Somebody mentioned earlier, those face-to-face contacts are super important. So that's definitely something you can do. All right. Then let's talk about Getting started with military partnership video series. This kind of mirrors that getting started guide. So there are 4 videos that are available for you to get on our website and watch these videos about how to partner together, about the intake and screening process that the CACs have. So they're asking about military affiliation when families walk through the door, whether that child is a military dependent or if the offender in the case is a military member. And then Heather also talked about the understanding key roles, those fact sheets that we've developed for each branch of service. Explains to the CACs what that looks like when they're engaging with the MCIOs and the Family Advocacy Program, and maybe the subtle differences between each branch and how they respond and manage cases of child abuse and intimate partner violence. And then another resource, because somebody mentioned at the last question about resource sharing, we just revamped our working with military families victim advocate toolkit. So this is live on our website too. This is for our victim advocates at our child advocacy centers. And this toolkit teaches them all the things that are available in the military, all the resources. So feel free to get on there and look through it. And if there's a resource that you know about that you're not seeing on our site, feel free to reach out, email me that resource so we can add it. Because our victim advocates at the CAC are absolutely thrilled to have this. So some of the things that are in here, when you're talking about safety assessments, there's information about military protection orders and how those work. They have information here about humanitarian transfers for safety concerns. They get information about transitional compensation in the military and who to talk to at the military when they have a non-offending parent who's interested in that. It also gives all the contact information for chaplains and the Military Family Readiness Center if someone needs some advice on budgeting. So feel free to give us any resources that you think would be good for us to have. All right.
Right. And then the last resource here that we wanted to highlight is something that we share with CACs that really helps them to understand military connection and all of the different ways that a family may have a military affiliation, and then some considerations for each of those affiliation types. So this might be more, for a CAC audience, but just for your awareness. And if you are working with any civilian organizations, you're welcome to share this with them if you think that could be helpful. We've found for CACs, especially those new to working with military partners, this has been very helpful. A couple of final things before we move to questions. One is that Jason put in the chat the link to our map that shows all of the CACs that are participating in our MOUs. So you're welcome to use that. We're also going to share our email addresses. We have a separate map for military programs, that Family Advocacy Program and military criminal investigative organizations share with their teams. That has a different level of information, including contact information. So depending on which program you're with, if you're with an MCIO or FAP, we can share that version too. But I also want to share how you can find a local CAC of any type, because I talked about those different membership types that we have. And for the MOUs, those are only available to accredited centers. And we actually have 800 of them now. But there are a couple hundred or a few hundred other types of CACs. So you may be in a community that doesn't have an accredited center close by, but maybe you have an associate center and they're doing really great work and they're just working towards meeting those accreditation standards. So we encourage you to work with all types of children's advocacy centers, and this is where you can find that full list. So if you're not seeing one near you on the MOU page, feel free to just go to our website. You scroll down to the middle of the page and you'll see that blue bar. You can put your zip code in, or you can put, if you click advanced search, that's where you can kind of put the state and see a broader range. So that is one thing we wanted to make sure that you were aware of. And then here's some additional pages. So our website has some links to maps, fact sheets, reports that's publicly available. Welcome to check that out anytime. Also, NCA Engage, our Learning Center Military Partnerships page. This is also publicly available. So that's where you're going to find all of our fact sheets, all of the reports, and the Victim Advocate Toolkit Amber talked about, as well as our military specific page that has all kinds of information about the CAC model and that foundational information. Then we also have a community that's a little bit more limited. This is only for our members, but in case you're working closely with a CAC, you can let them know that we have this community, and that is where people can post, ask each other for resources, and connect in an interactive way. So that is all that we had. I'm forgetting if we're doing, wait, hold on, I might have just hit the button a couple extra times. Sorry. Nope, maybe not.
No, you're good, Heather. Just to note that all of these links, as well as a few additional links that complement this session, are going to be available on the event page, and that's kind of just visually captured here. And then we will move to kind of wrapping up here as well in our post-webinar check-in, and I'll let Heather wrap us up with that.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Caitlin. So just curious for your thoughts in the comments, what is one thing that you'd like to do to strengthen the work of your local Children's Advocacy Center and the way that they work with your program? So feel free to put that in. And while you're doing that, a couple of closing, well, let's do questions. So one question that came in is about the Coast Guard and if we have an MOU with the Coast Guard, which is a great question. And the answer is that we focused this project on the Department of Defense services. And because Coast Guard falls under Department of Homeland Security, we're sort of addressing that separately. We do not have an MOU at this time, but recognize that there is interest in that, and it's certainly on our list of things to explore. I will say that there are a ton of CACs that are near Coast Guard stations, and recognize that those families have the same need to have coordinated care. So we encourage them to work with Coast Guard and certainly can support them in that as well. The other question that came up is around National Guard. Amber, do you want to take this question? Is if the MOUs address National Guard and how it works for those families?
Absolutely. So if the National Guard member is on orders at the time, then yes, it does. I have also personally worked at a base where we had National Guard on the base, and I had commanders, maybe the military member of the family, they weren't covered because they weren't on orders at the time, but I have had commanders put families on orders for that extra support. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen, in which case then they would fall under that MOU. One case was a problematic sexual behavior case where the command felt the family just needed that extra level of support. So they did put that military member on orders so they could access all the services they needed at the time. Now, if they are not on orders at the time of an incident, it would fall on local authorities and local community services.
Thanks, Amber. I'm going through the questions and just going to kind of go quickly as time's passing by. Someone asked if handouts are available in different languages. So at National Children's Alliance, our community-facing handouts are available in other languages. These particular handouts that are really for CAC audience are unfortunately only available in English. If there's a handout that you see a need for in another language, please let us know because we can explore having some of those translated. And so reach out to us. I'm going to put up the slide that has our email addresses. Please do let us know if there's a need for that, and we're happy to look into it. The next question is asking, what does collaboration and tracking look like between local and military advocacy services when a child or family has to relocate due to assignment and an investigation is still open and active? Amber, do you want to speak to that?
Absolutely. So, so let's say there's a humanitarian transfer for safety or a PCS. Well, generally the military doesn't, if a family is in a crisis situation, they generally don't like to PCS a family, so they will put that PCS on hold. But if there's a humanitarian transfer because of a safety situation, what would happen is the losing family advocacy program at the base there would then transfer the case to the gaining base's family advocacy program with a warm handoff, transfer the files and all the information, give them all the contact information with the Child Advocacy Center, if the MCIO that's involved, or if local law enforcement is the one leading the investigation, would pass that off. The local child protection would also reach out to the state where the family's moving to and let the new state child protection know as well. You could also hold an MDT with the gaining basis family advocacy and the new child protection in that state as well to help them coordinate services for that situation.
Thanks, Amber. Before I turn it back to Kaylin to close us out, I just want to thank all of you for joining us today. It's been fun to talk with you about these partnerships. It's something we are super excited about and fully available to support. So our information is here. Please reach out anytime, no matter what your role is. It's truly our pleasure to connect you with children's advocacy centers, to answer questions, to help facilitate any relationship glitches that come up. I mean, this is what we're here for. We're to support your work with CACs or military partners if you're a CAC, and we are truly liaisons. So reach out, and we're happy to help. Thank you so much.
Wow, thanks so much, Heather and Amber. That was amazing. And I appreciate all of that information and all of the work that y'all are also doing and all of the mindfulness and just thought that you were putting into really like alleviating those stressors on families when they're coming to you already at a heightened state. It's very powerful. So thank you all. And again, yes, if y'all have any questions, especially once you get into those resources, please check out those guides and those handouts that NCA have. They're really, really first visually stunning, but also the content is wonderful and very helpful. It can also transcend, even as they were saying, this specific work with CACs into more like military awareness, as well as supporting those specific families and their experiences. And if you have any questions, once you start digging into those, please just circle back to the slides, and Amber and Heather's email are available on that PDF handout of the slides. So thank you both for your time today. And I will move up to wrapping us up and just giving some last minute updates in terms of getting that CE, as I mentioned at the top of the hour. So the link to the evaluation for today's, if you are hoping to get CE credits or a certificate of attendance for tracking your professional development hours, the link to the evaluation is available on the event page. When you visit the page, you should see a purple button like the one currently on the screen. You can then click that and it will take you to first a quick evaluation of today's session, and then a post test that will direct you to the CE option of your choice. The CE options available today are listed on the slides currently, as well as on the event page. If you do not see this button, especially if you've had the page pulled up since the beginning of the webinar that we recommended at the top of the hour, please refresh or exit out and reload the page because that button sometimes doesn't show if you've had the page pulled up. Since it's added during the session. Your feedback is very important to us, so we do ask you to take that short evaluation, letting us know your thoughts on today's webinar. And then after that evaluation, you, as I said, will be directed to a list of opportunities offered for today's session. CE credits available for today are from the American Association for Family and Consumer Sciences, the Patient Advocate Certification Board, the Commission for Case Manager Certification, DSAACP credentialing, the National Advocate Credentialing Program, the National Council on Family Relations, and UT Austin Steve Hicks School of Social Work, as well as I mentioned those Oh, yes. And I noticed it is 1.0 continuing education hours. Thank you for that catch. Yes, we are offering 1 hour for today's session. So the slide is incorrect there. Select certificates require the completion of a post-test, as I mentioned. Not all CEs require that. So if you do get taken to that link, you will need to complete that post-test with a score of 80% or higher. Once you have completed that process, certificates should be emailed to you within 24 to 48 hours of completing the evaluation and post-test process. Some email providers will kick that to your spam folder. So if you're not seeing that email come through, please check your spam folder first. But if you're still not seeing that, please email us at ce@oneop.org. Again, if you're having any issues and need to refer back, just look at the slide deck and get that email and send us an email because we definitely want to ensure that you receive your certificate, whatever certificate that is that you hope to receive for today. We also invite you to join our next webinar at the end of this month at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Clinician Heal Thyself, Self-Care and Ethical Practices for Service Providers. This webinar will explore service providers' confidence and the correlation to clinician satisfaction, finding meaning in practice, and preventing burnout. You can RSVP now for that webinar on the event page. We also invite you to join us for our Military Family Readiness Academy. We are gearing up to kick that off here soon in the fall. That will be in August of September. The Academy is an annual event that brings together military family service providers from multiple disciplines to address a topic important to the military family readiness system that we are all a part of. And Heather and Amber did a wonderful job of explaining a bit more earlier in the session. This year, we will be bringing together experts and professionals like yourselves to address key challenges facing our military youth and their well-being. Over the course of 6 weeks, we will deliver a series of professional development opportunities, including an expert panel discussion and 3 following webinars. The panel discussion will discuss how military family service providers across the MFRS can support the well-being of military youth. And then the webinars will go further into that conversation by discussing evidence-informed strategies to support adolescents' well-being through transitions, create inclusive programming, and strengthen those protective factors for our military-connected youth. A variety of CE credits will also, of course, be offered during those sessions, and you can check that out on the link on the slide as well as in the chat pod now. And you can also RSVP and reserve your space to attend that virtual academy with us here in the fall. And also, if you want to stay connected, get any upcoming events, also get daily resources, sharing, and such, please visit our website. You're welcome to subscribe to our mailing list where we send updated upcoming webinars, updates on those, as well as CE opportunities. And you can, of course, follow us on social media to get that information as you scroll through your socials. Thank you again so much for joining us. We will leave this room open one more moment or two. But again, if you have any questions, please refer back to the event page. That should be a one-stop shop. And feel free to email us on any of the emails provided in the slides for today if you need further assistance or have additional questions. Thank you all so much for joining us. And for our participants, thank you for engaging and sharing your ideas and how you are already working to strengthen that support for our military families. We hope to see you in a future program. Thank you so much for your time today.